Hello Internet, I'm Guy. I've got an interesting project today for my e-bike. I bought this bike last year and I've absolutely loved riding it. It's a great bike, but I wanted to be able to carry more stuff, hence the panniers right here. One of the reasons is because when I bike around the two-lane blacktops in rural Maine here, I see a lot of trash. And I'd like to pick it up and just be good to the community and end up getting a lot of 5-cent per bottle redeemables, totaling, sometimes $50 a year, which is kind of a nice reward for the good service for the community. But I do it for the sheer fun of it, honestly. So I wanted a way to carry a fair amount of stuff. The pannier is the good solution, but for this bike, it has a shock absorber in the rear. So that means that the bike rack, which my tool bag is riding on right now, I can take that right off just right now, it would normally be strapped on. This will ride up and down relative to the wheel and the axle. So the problem here is if I put the panniers on here, sit them on there, two problems actually. One is that they will come in and hit the wheel here, and the other is that they don't secure the way I would like them to because of intersecting issues of wanting to put my tool bag on top of here. So I have a solution for getting the tool bag on top of here, but what I need to do to accommodate this sitting on here so that the panniers don't rub against the wheel is I need to put some telescoping rods here and here so they can sit right there. And these panniers are actually designed with clips to hit the normal struts on a bike that doesn't have a shock absorber. So this is the job for today, is to figure out how to make telescoping rods connect from the bike rack to somewhere near the axle down there. So join me on my journey as I figure this out. So I started out at the hardware store and bought some of this hobby tubing that you can get from K&S. They've been around for about 80 years apparently. The interlocking telescoping hobby brass tubing that you can see in most hardware stores. But what I got here was stainless steel because I wanted it to be rugged and strong and weatherproof. And I got two different sizes, an inner and an outer, and they didn't quite fit that well. I had to actually go in the lathe and bore this larger diameter out, which was surprising to me. I would have thought that these would all be engineered to telescope very nicely. But I bored this out about this far, and it's a little bit stiff. So I'm not entirely pleased with that. So I have another solution. I have another piece of stainless steel tubing here and some aluminum rod, and that just slides in there just beautifully. So I'm going to use aluminum at one end and this stainless steel at the other end. That's the plan. So looking at the bike, I'm thinking I can connect this rod from here to here. There's a little triangular cutout here that I could bring a rod out and then have a mounting point there. If I take the tubing and smash it flat, I could bolt it right on there. Then I can make some kind of bracket that comes across here with an angle down to capture the aluminum rod at the top here. So that's the beginning of a plan. First thing I'm going to do is make some rods that come out here to bring it out past the brake and gear changing mechanisms. So let me check my metal stock and see what kind of thing I want to use for a 1-inch rod sticking out from the side. I could use aluminum or Delrin. I think I like aluminum. That's good solid stuff. So I'm going to start by facing off the end, as is tradition. That'll do. So I've decided to use a M5 metric bolt. I'm going to set up and center drill and then drill a tapping drill size. Since I'm going to make this piece about 1 inch long, I've set up a piece of tape on my drill so I can tell when to stop and drill all the way through here, and then I can tap both ends and put bolts at both ends. So because this is going to be visible, I'm just going to clean up the outside surface, which is, I guess, a traditional thing to do anyway. So now I'm going to part this off. So I've got it flipped over, and now I'm going to just face off the back end. And then just clean up the edge with a bevel. So now I'm going to tap in the other side, running the machine really slowly and letting the tailstock just ride its way in a little bit. A little bit more. Okay, I've got these parts mounted here, one on each side, and that will then support the telescopic strut that will bolt on here and then attach to the rack at the top. So I've got a 12-inch length of the stainless steel tubing that the 3/8 inch aluminum can slide in and out of to adjust for the height of the adjusting shock absorber on the bike. So I just need to cut it in half, so I have one for each side of the bike. And I'm going to use my grinder because real men don't use hacksaws. A little cleanup on a belt sander. So the cut piece of stainless steel now is perfect fit for the 3/8 inch aluminum rod. That'll just glide around nicely. So now what I want to do is smush it flat so I can drill a hole in it. Hopefully this is going to work out. Oh yes, that'll work out fine. I think I can hammer that a bit flatter, but let's try a bit more. That's probably flat enough. No, I need to go further because there's a radius there on that round piece of aluminum, so I'm going to go down a bit more. I've got lots of wiggle room here to go. Yeah, I think that's enough wiggle room there, and I can always smash that down a bit more with a hammer. Okay, so now I'm going to round off the end on my grinder to match the round profile of the standoff I've already mounted to the bike. That's pretty good. Okay, so I've completed this, and it's just going to go right on there beautifully. I just tighten that down a little bit, and this is going to line up right up there to the bike rack. And of course I can bend this in to adjust it to meet. So now I have the 3/8 inch aluminum rod that slides right inside the stainless steel tube, and so this can move up and down when the shock absorber moves the wheel relative to the rack here. So all I have to do now is figure out how to bracket this on to the bottom of the rack, and I'm going to be in business here. This will work just fine, I think. Well, it's interesting. I pulled two pieces of 3/8 inch rod out of my stockpile. This one is just a little bit under 3/8, 0.373, and this one is 386. So yeah, actually 382, 384, something like that. So I've got to turn it down to get it so that it'll slide in and out of the stainless steel tube. So that's my next step here. So I'm going to start by drilling a center hole. I'm going to need about 5 inches of stick out, so I have plenty of rod to slide down inside of the stainless steel tube. So I figure about 5 inches will do it. Get that tightened up. Drop this in. That's all centered up. Looks like it's not cutting anymore here, so maybe it was just one thick end. Hopefully one more cleanup pass will do it. All right, let's have a look. That's 375. I think I want to go down about another thou to make sure it'll slide really nicely. Okay, let's do a test fit. Get that sliding on there. Oh yeah, that's a perfect tolerance. It's actually coming up just a little bit right there, but I'm only going to be using about this much because the bike actually only moves about 3/4 of an inch. But I wanted to have lots of room to wiggle there. So here, now I've got both the rods sliding very nicely in the tubes mounted to the axles. What I'm going to do now is figure out a way to mount a bracket underneath this section of the rack so that there are angles that come down here and capture the rods. Just right in somewhere in this zone here. I found a scrap of aluminum that I had surfaced with my fly cutter recently, and I've cut it so that it'll fit down here between the two rods, and I can secure it here with a couple of bolts, mount it up in there, and then figure out how to match the angle of the rods to interface down into this surface of this plate. So we'll see how this works out. It's going to be a first try. So there are some ridges on the bottom and another ridge here and another one here. I've taken this chunk and milled out some sections there so it'll fit right up against there, and then I'll put bolts right into these sections to secure it to the rack. I've also drawn these lines roughly to align with the angle of the rods, and I'm going to figure out how to cut a section out here and then attach these rods onto the bolts. I'm going to have to put little flats on there, I think. I've traced off the angle of the rod as it comes up against this surface here, so I'm now going to cut this out with the bandsaw and then refine it later. So that's the rough cut surface, and I've used my square to true this up into the mill, and I'm going to drop my cutter head down and get ready to kind of refine that edge just a little bit. Lock the column down, and let's see what happens here. And the other side. So this is all machined to fit right in there really nicely. And what I want to do is have a couple of holes, that go right into here through here. So I've marked these lines off as perfectly square, and I'm going to drill a couple of holes there and then bolt this on right underneath it there. I'm going to center drill these holes and then tap them for 832 because I happen to have some nice button head screws. I just finished tapping this hole, and then I had to move back over to this hole. So I'm using my tap guide as a center finder, essentially, to line up that hole exactly. And then I'm just going to drop it into the tap handle and start tapping away here. Need a little cutting fluid. So I've got this bracket in place, just tightening down these button screws. There's a nice firmly embedded, half-inch embedded screws that go way down in there. So now I have to decide where to cut this rod off, and I want to allow for plenty of movement, but also plenty of engagement in the tube at the bottom of this shaft here. So I'm just going to pull it up about an inch or so and mark it and then cut it. And then I'm going to work on flattening a section right here so that it'll bolt in. So I've got the top end of the rod chucked up in the mill, and I'm going to take off 50 thou, maybe 50 thou on that side and maybe a bit more on the side that bears up against the flat surface. So I've got the rod flipped over, but now I need to true up these two faces. So I'm going to use gauge blocks and just get that settled down onto there, like that. So I now have the rotation correct, settle it down onto the bottom of the vise and torque that down. Hopefully those are going to be pretty parallel. I've decided to use a 1032 bolt that will go in pretty good and deep down in there, at least a ½ inch. I want a lot of structure here. I really don't want this thing to fail. That would be bad. So I'm using a number 9 clearance drill for a 1032 bolt. Let's see how that fits. Yep, that's good enough. So back to the bike rack. I've got my hole and my flats. I'm going to use a transfer punch to locate the hole that I need right here. Get that pretty much centered and got a nice little mark. That's close enough. I might move it over just a hair, but that's a good way to get that set up. I've got the bracket clamped in the side of my vise, and I'm using parallels to use by eye to line up these two surfaces, and I've got it clamped in tight. So I'm going to pre-drill and then a number 20 tap drill. So I've got my 1032 tap in my tapping handle, and using the tapping guide, just going to go in there and tap some 1032 threads. Okay, final test fit. Putting that bolt right in there, lining it up, going in beautifully. So I'm going to put thread lock in there, of course, because the last thing I want is any of these screws coming loose while I'm on a ride. But that seems to be working fine. I'm going to tighten up the other one and do a quick ride around the block and see how it all works. Well, the ride test worked fine. As you can see, it seems to fit just beautifully on the bike. So now the question is, how well do the panniers sit on there? Okay, so I'm going to put the panniers on. They're a little fussy to get on there because of these weird clips that they use. That one, and then that one. Okay, that's all settled on. I'm going to put my little spacer block underneath of there. And that's going to sit there, and then my toolkit will sit on top of there. But I think this is going to work really great. It's holding the bags away from the wheel as it should. Here you can see the rods clearly holding the panniers away from the wheel. So here's the final assembly. I've got my tool case mounted on top of the panniers with my little spacer block underneath it there. I have lubricated the slides right here with some good quality silicone lube, and the bags clip, as you can see, very nicely onto the struts that I've made. So I'm really pleased with this. I'm going to be riding happy, carrying lots of stuff.